What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Davidson podcast, where I get to interview amazing people and help share their wisdom with the world. Let me know your takeaways and feel free to connect with the guest. I'm aiming to build a community around coaching, self-development, leadership, where people are not afraid to be their most authentic versions of themselves. You can find us on video by searching the Davidson podcast on YouTube. Welcome and enjoy the ride. Yo, what's going on, everyone? Today we're gonna switch it up. We got one of my boys, Brandon Ngai, who's amazing. He's a go-getter. He's a hustler. He's a relationship builder. One of my favorite dudes in the world. We're gonna switch it up, and he's gonna interview me. So, yeah, this should be fun. Brandon apparently has put a lot of thought and preparation into it. So, you know, if I put that much amount of preparation and thought into anything, I'm sure I would be crushing as much as he is. But no, excited to do this. Thanks, Brandon. Appreciate you.
I hope it comes through, man. So one little disclosure is two things. One, thanks for the opportunity. Once again, like I just said, I really look at this as an opportunity to give back because, you know, you've interviewed 94 people up to this point because it's the 95th podcast, and you've just had so many life lessons, so many different things that you've learned and accumulated over your life. And I think it's almost absurd that we haven't had a chance to share it with the world yet. And then two, I'm probably not going to give much feedback on your responses, and not because I don't have feedback. It's mostly just because I want the listeners to be able to understand the purity and, you know, really just fully take in your responses and have me not hinder it at all. So dude, if you're ready, let's jump into it.
All right, let's do it.
Awesome. So the first question, talking about the podcast, right? What was your initial motive, or what was your intent on starting a podcast in the first place and interviewing all these people?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's actually the question that I think about a lot as I, have dedicated hundreds of hours into the podcast, getting guests, kind of reflecting on afterwards, writing blog posts about the lessons from it. I think for me, growing up like financially poor, right? Parents both went to bankruptcy. Everyone in my family, for the most part, has gone through bankruptcy and has living off of government assisted, reduced lunch, free lunch programs. I guess I saw how I was growing in the scarcity mindset that I had around me. And, I was guilty of it as well, right? It was everyone around me, right? From my family, I've had uncles and people that have gone, my dad went to jail, and a lot of my family, I say there wasn't the best role models, right? I mean, now reflecting on it, I see that everything happens for a reason, but during it, I just felt so surrounded by so much negativity and, people going to jail all the time, and, didn't have a lot of great mentors. So when I grew up, I was getting fired from job to job. I was I was not doing well. I was on academic probation in college, in high school. I took hard classes, your AP and IB and honors classes and stuff like that, but I didn't do well. So my self-worth was very low. So when I went on LinkedIn, I was like, wait a second, I can reach out to people that I listen to their podcast and be able to learn from them. This is amazing. So what I did was I reached out to people and I wanted to interview. And then first I started interviewing kind of what you do a lot of times. And then I was like, wait a second, this conversation could help so many people. And then, just reflecting, looking at the stats the other day, I've had thousands and thousands of listeners and thousands of hours of people listening to the content. I'm like, oh my God, that's a lot of people that I've helped, So yeah, for me, I think it was just growing up and I didn't have the best mentors. I realized wow, now I live a life where I surround myself with people like you who are inspiring. And why would I not want to share that with the world?
Okay, that's awesome. And so you've done essentially 94 interviews up to this point. So like just thinking about that, and the variety is very very large, right? Like the amount of people, it's not like just salespeople or just Asians or just women or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
So like with interacting with so many people and throughout this entire journey of podcasts and interviews, what are some of the biggest lessons and takeaways that you've had so far?
Yeah, I think the top people, like the most successful people that, whether they W-2 like 800K or not, I think that aside, they definitely are able to reframe or able to frame adversity in a positive way. Like for instance, before interviewing a lot of people who like Asian Americans, I'd be like, oh, like how many Asian Americans do we know in top revenue producing roles, right? Like whether it's partners or executives or VPs or directors. After speaking with them, I realized that they don't look to their heritage as a disadvantage. They see the positive in everything. So for instance, when I interviewed a lot of the LinkedIn managers, from sales development managers to relationship managers to account executive managers, they all had shared the same thought process where actually no, being Asian is good. We're better listeners, we're humble, we're not one to brag, like we have good work ethic. Prior to interviewing them, my story or my frame of reference was always like, oh, we're passive, we're not able to ask for promotions, we're it. Of course, if I have that mentality, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So being Asian is just one of the examples, right? I would speak to African American leaders and Latinx leaders, and I noticed that, oh wow, they're able to frame it in a way. Well, actually, we have this close knit community, and yes, there's fewer of us, but when we get together, it's a beautiful thing. So, anyone that has gone through. And then when I interview people in the mindfulness community, whether it's like yoga teachers or people that have both like a business sense and have a sense peace of mind, because that's something that I'm always like seeking for as well. They're also able to, they had a lot of adversity. So I used to think that I would generalize like, oh, like this white privileged guy probably like had it easy. And then when I interview them, I realized like, oh, actually, no, some of them also come from broken families. So it's inspiring for me to kind of change my worldview and to not generalize things like that. So for me, it's personally helped me. So selfishly, it's helped me out a lot, but in doing so, it's also helped thousands of hours of content. So, hundreds of people have reached out to me saying like, hey, like that was really inspiring. And a lot of them are like straight out of college too, or so for me, that's inspiring to know that I can change the trajectory of someone's life that early on in their career.
That's awesome. That's great. And to expand off of that idea of being Asian, right? I want to actually transition into something that I think is I wouldn't say it's a strong suit of the Asian culture, and especially the male culture as well, which is vulnerability, right? Like something that you emulate so well. So one of the questions we had was like, first of all, Christina mentioned that she's just seen it evolve over time from knowing you from childhood to now. And Aditya says it's like literally one of his most favorite qualities about you. So how would you say that your sense of vulnerability has evolved over time, whether it was from when you were a kid or when you started college or whatever the case may be until now?
Yeah, that's a deep question. I think in general, so I think there's two parts to it. I think Asian culture and a lot of minorities view mental health as like, well, I don't even have time for mental. Like I used to work at a pediatric dentist office, and she worked with like autistic kids. So she was one of my first like mentors. And she would say like, like we don't have like age, like us, she's old school Asian, right? Like, so not around our age, like much older.
Yeah.
We don't have time to think about like the past, and we don't have time, like we're just busy making ends meet. Like who has time to reflect on stuff like that, right? And I'm just like, that's interesting, because I think we should all take time to reflect and process some of these like trauma and emotions. But she's like us Asians like don't have time for that. Like just have action, like just do stuff. And I agreed to a certain extent, but I think making time like this, for instance, and just reflecting and sharing gratitude, and also being able to dig deep, like, I know, like, I've introduced you to the world of Landmark, and we talk all the time about the impact that Landmark has had on both of our lives. And if it wasn't for that call to my dad, to, more for me, like just for me to forgive him. Like, I remember I was so angry at him that I was like, I'm not going to invite him to my wedding, and, I got married not too long ago, less than 2 weeks ago. And, seeing my dad there, can be triggering too, because, like, he left us at a young age. But, just having everyone, all the family in one place, and having like a really close wedding, I think it takes vulnerability, and it takes like a big man or a big person to forgive someone who, hasn't really been there for most of your life. And I guess, like, in a way, like, I don't think the podcast would have happened without him, because if I had like a normal role model, aka like a lot of people's fathers, I don't think I would be having thousands of conversations with people every day trying to distill like the essence of their success. So, prior to these 94 episodes, I was having, thousands of conversations, right? I just didn't record them. So, I mean, I'm sure you can understand, like, you do that. That's what you do for a living, like, every day, right? But yeah, imagine, you see someone on the surface, and you being in a client facing role, like, you see people that are so confident and so inspiring, and then you interviewing them in the podcast, and then you talk to them and they're like, honestly, like, I was scared shitless to do this podcast. And I'm like, what? Like, that's crazy. You're crushing it, So when they model that vulnerability, it rubs off on me, and I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I can be open about my mental health issues, and, my insecurities about, like, being an Asian male, and then societal negative stereotypes and how that plays into my psyche and stuff. And, I talk about this stuff, but I think ultimately, like, it has impacted a lot of people.
That's awesome. And, to expand off of that too, one thing that, by conversing with a lot of people that you've been able to impact and connect with, etc. Mm-hmm. One thing that I personally find that's incredible is that the vulnerability that you have does allow you to connect with so many people on such a deeper level. And the thing that amazes me is, even though I know you have like hundreds, if not thousands of really good friends and meaningful relationships, every time you're in front of someone, you make that person feel like they're the only person in the world, and like you have this presence to you. So like, how did that form? Like are there things that you practice to really be present and be able to, intentionally or unintentionally be able to create that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think the coolest lesson that I've learned throughout my life is just like, you get whatever you put out in the world, like, comes back to you, right? So I also would say, like, I think that's why we're so close, because I feel the same about you, where, you're obviously like a go-getter, you're ambitious, so you have the visionary aspects, but then you also have the execution part too. Because I think there's a lot of visionaries out there, and there's like executioners, like, get stuff done, but it's very rare to have both. And I think both of us, like, share that quality. So your question was about like
how do you practice presence, right? How do you practice being a good listener to make that person really feel like they've been heard, and that, like, that you're just there with them at the moment, or with all the distractions that we have, the phone, social media, work, relationships, etc. Like, when I'm with you, I'm like totally locked in. And I think it's largely in part by, the way that you hold yourself and the way you conduct yourself in front of people.
Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks for elaborating on that. I think there's like practices that help. Like meditation, I think, has been like a pretty good practice for me. I know you're also into hiking. I think every time I hike, I just feel more spiritually connected to the world. So I'm closer to my truth, my spiritual truth, which is like being a place of so I did this program called Next Level Training, and what I've received from that was curiosity, abundance, and reflection. So I try to be a reflection for people so that, I create the space where people can just be vulnerable and share themselves like authentically and in abundance, in the sense that, like by getting married and that being like a huge block for me, by buying a house and that being like equally as big of a block for me, like the work that we do together, like I want to show that, okay, there's an abundant world out there and that you don't have to pick and choose, like you can have it all. So I think the thing that I'm most proud of myself is being able to like not only like be good at like CrossFit and do these Spartan races and read 1,000 books and do a podcast and stuff like that, but I think that I try to emulate like everything where you don't have to choose family or friends. You can have family and friends. You don't have to choose your relationship or your career. You can have a great career and you can have a loving relationship. So I try to model that it is possible to have it all.
That's awesome. So you're segueing these perfectly because my next topic was actually relationships. So one of the biggest questions that we had was, recently I just spoke to someone and they said something that, kind of hit me hard just because I guess I'm still a little young and immature, but they said that a happy relationship isn't a destination. It's a constant journey and constant work. And I was just like, man, that sounds exhausting. And, but I know that you've had, certain relationship struggles and stuff like that. And I'm just curious, like, what were some of the biggest hardships between you and Sammy and how did you guys work through them?
Yeah, bless her soul. Like she's, the moment I knew she was the one was when I was like going through this, like, I call it like a quarter life crisis. I think a lot of people go through it because when you go to college, like, how are you supposed to know from that day in college what you want to do for the rest of your life? Like
Yeah.
most people don't know like when they're in college. It's usually after college. So when we first started dating, I was like I couldn't make a decision, right? I was kind of like leading her on and I was still like talking to, multiple, folks. And, she was like very patient with me, and, I'm always grateful because, I moved to Connecticut like randomly, even though, and then it's funny because I think the pattern is because my dad left us. Like I was doing that with like all of my relationships, like not only friends, but work relationships, like with my managers. Like every time I won like employee of the year award or every time I won an award, I would leave right after that because vulnerable enough um, to like get to a place where like, oh my God, like they're gonna rely on me. And then anytime I was just scared of responsibility. Like I was afraid of, so to answer your question, like Sammy, I was always afraid of like truly committing. That's why it took me like 8 years to like actually get married. Or a little bit less than 8 years to propose to her and then 8 years to like actually get married. But yeah, we had a lot of breakdowns, I have like a addictive personality. I was always trying to like win others over and in that pursuit of winning in life, quote, like in business slash like sales slash like success. There were times where honestly, like I didn't really make her a priority and she still had the patience and the vision that, we can still have a bright future together. And, I going through Landmark and going through a lot of these self-development programs, I realized the thing that I was running away from the most was actually like what was literally right next to me the whole time. When I was going through therapy for hundreds of hours, when I was, when I was like too afraid to call like my dad or like even just calling my ex relationships and apologizing for like being a dick essentially, she still stuck with me, even when I was like lost and I was like spending like thousands of dollars on self-development. Like she was just like, all right, like, I still see like the goodness and the pureness in his heart, despite like him not really making me like a priority time wise. Like, I would say, it's also good to have self-compassion for myself that like I'm not perfect, and like that's just life. Like we go through like dips and lulls.
Man, we gotta interview Sammy.
Yeah, it's funny, we're so opposites. Like I love what I love like public speaking, and I've been doing like a lot of these
Yeah.
every week. She doesn't like, she's like the opposite. I'm always like, oh, can I record this? Because like she says like the cutest things sometimes that are like
Yeah.
so, and then she's like, no, like I'll kill you if you ever like try to.
That's awesome. Well, dude, now that you are married, good question that someone else had. I think it was Edwin. Was what does it mean to be a good partner or a good husband to you?
Yeah, Edwin's awesome. He sends me like memes and stuff about relationship stuff every morning, like a lot of times, and I respect
Yep.
him a lot. But yeah, Edwin's like one of my best friends. Like he's someone I look up to a lot, like similar to you, you know. Um, but yeah, I think like and it's cool because a lot of my coaching clients are going through this right now. And I actually received a lot of clients from, ironically, their partners referring me. So I'm
That's
like,
awesome.
yeah, so for me, like that's like a really cool thing. But yeah, to me, being a partner is like not wanting to like change the other person and just accepting them for who they are, because I think we all have like a question I often ask my clients and people are, what was it about that, you know, your partner that initially drew you to them? Like why did you like fall for them initially, right? Because I think people lose touch of that. And I think to your question about like it's a process, it's an ongoing process. It's never like, you know, the end. It's about the journey. I think it's, except like for instance like with Sammy, right? Like every time she, you know, there's so many things that like it literally melts my heart. Like I cry like a lot when I think about how beautiful she is, like just because, you know, we'll watch like a corny like commercial, like you know how there's like a lot of these corny commercials that's like sentimental and stuff.
Yeah.
Go cry.
It's all the dog commercials.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of them. But even it doesn't even have to be a dog. It could be like any animal. She'll just
Yeah.
cry, and I think it's like her like innocent, pure heart. Like it, you know. I think like, I mean, yeah. This question, it's hard to answer because I think there's like so many components to it. I think there needs to be like a counterbalance. Like I think the best relationships that I've seen, like there's like a yin and a yang. Like I'm the go-getter, I'm the one that's like visionary, like have so many companies, I'm releasing this many books, like I'm finishing 1,000 books by this date. But she's definitely more of the, it's like, hey babe, like let's just watch like, you know, Queen's Gambit and binge on Netflix all day. I'm like, okay, so you know, but you need that sometimes, you know. Like if I dated someone else like me, like we would drive each other crazy probably, you know. Like we wouldn't even have time for each other, you know. So I think if I can distill it into like three words, I would say like acceptance. I would say like validating the other person's like experience, like not making them wrong, like not.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that's a huge one because I think we always like think we're like smarter than our partners, but in reality, everyone's entitled to their own. And when you truly accept their experience, that's when they feel heard, and then that's when there's space to grow and there's space to when you don't have expectations, it leads for like a better marriage, better relationship. And then lastly, I would say just like laughing, you know, like laughing together, like smiling. Like if you can intentionally make them laugh like every day, like I think that's always gonna be a great relationship.
Love that. Love that. Okay, awesome. So now let's change it up a bit. Let's go into something a little bit more fun.
Mm-hmm.
So you are a hustler, like the definition of it. And Jenny told me that you've been working since you were like 14. You've just always been a hustler, right? Always a go-getter.
That's true.
So tell me about like some of your early experiences. Like where did this fire come from? And like what are some of your craziest work stories, like when you were young or throughout the experience of like working dozens of jobs?
Yeah, this is a great question. I love it. I think one of the crazy, and Jenny is right. Like I was always hustling like at an early age. Like like even to pay for college, like I worked 3 jobs like while going to school full time, you know.
What were they?
So I worked at like a DNA, and this is funny because this really kind of explains me in a nutshell. I worked at a DNA lab.
Okay.
I did door-to-door sales, selling like Verizon FiOS and Cutco knives. And then I worked at a pediatric dentist's office as a dental assistant. So yeah, so some of the crazy stories was like, I remember like going into work and Dr. Chow would like, it'd be like a Saturday morning, early morning, and she'd be like, let me guess, like you're hungover, you partied last night, right? And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, how do you know? She's like, I'm not dumb. Like I went to Ohio State University. Like I know what you could.
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh, okay. But it was cool because this is like who I am, right? 8 of my fraternity brothers have worked at that dentist office to like since then, right?
Yeah.
So there were like funny stories. Like I remember like I was so into working sometimes that I actually like actually like sometimes I would skip classes just to go to work, which like is it's mind blowing, right? But funny thing is like that I got let go because of that, because they're like, because they saw my class schedule and they saw me clock in, they're like,
Yeah.
it makes sense. So it was even hard to like justify that, right? But I think, yeah, I have like a lot of like fun stories, but I think like, you know, I worked at like Quiznos. I worked at, because the Quiznos I think was like my first legit, like real job. Like, and then I worked at the movie theaters and they called me like Daniel-san. I remember I was always the only Asian person and they'll be like Daniel-san, you know. But it's funny because like back when I was younger, like I thought it was cool, like I thought it was endearing. I was like, oh, they accept me, like, you know, they get, you know. But now I'm looking back at it, it's like a little bit microaggression-y, but you know, like it isn't. But yeah, it's funny. Like, but yeah, I have plenty of stories. Like I've like I got let go from like Village Office Supply, and that was like my first inside sales job where I was just calling corporations and just hustling, you know. But I was not ready then. Like it was so bad that my VP of sales bought me an alarm clock, because that's how like I showed up late to like the Wednesday morning like stand-ups. Like I've come a long way, let's just say that.
Well, wait, that's actually a perfect transition, because the next question was going to be, with all the stuff that you do between the podcast, coaching, working as a top performer at LinkedIn, doing self-development, meditating, reading books, being a great partner, how do you manage your time? Like me and Will were talking about it. Like we could feel like we have 20 things to do in our to-do list, and then we just look at Davidson and we're like, he's probably got like 50. We shouldn't be complaining. Like, how do you manage your time? Like, is everything just super regimented on a calendar? Do you have like a daily to-do task where you just cross things off?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you just like a master of chaos where whenever it just comes to your mind, you just start doing it and then you just don't do it. You just don't stop until it's done.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's two things, like habit stacking, right? So like Jeff Zakarsky in our men's group, like for instance, like when we were buddies, we started doing like a habit like checklist. So every day, you know, as long as I get through my checklist, that like my non-negotiables. So for me, it's like meditation, a workout, like usually high intensity interval training.
Yep.
I do that every morning at like 8 usually with the guys that I started. And then when I get up like an hour earlier, so let's say I get up at 6:30, from 6:30 to 7:30 is when I do all my creative work. So writing my books, like, you know, doing my podcast, editing the podcast, like writing, you know, doing research for my next podcast guests, as I have a guest like every week or so. So I do all my creative stuff then. And then after my workout, like I shower, and then and then like throughout the day, like at night, I do schedule out like my accountability groups. So, you know, with the fellas, so the men's group, I'll make sure like I block it off so it's like a reoccurring. And then I have other accountability groups that I'm a part of, or that I started. Like I have a Summit of Greatness accountability group that we've been supporting each other. And then on the weekends, like I mostly like tied, like it's spent mostly on relationships. So I'll spend most of it with my partner. And then, at night, I always block off at least an hour to be with Sammy. And then that's like where I just turn off my phone. Like lately we've been playing a lot of video games together because like that's something that we like to do together. And then, yeah, reading a book. If I right before I go to sleep, like from 10 to midnight is when I usually read my books. So that's how I'm able to like complete a book a week typically.
Say 10 to midnight?
Yeah, typically most of the time.
Jesus. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot of those are just habits, man. You just, wow. Yeah. Okay. Got it. Okay. Awesome. So let's go on to more fun stuff. So let's talk about Asians, and actually you choose. I wanted to share about either the Asian Alliance program at LinkedIn and that sense of community there and like how that formed and, what was the creation of it. And then secondly, just Asian in sales.
Yeah. They both go hand in hand. I think the cool thing I see about the pandemic is actually like Asians, I see us coming together more. I think before it was like Koreans hang out with Koreans, Japanese hang out with Japanese, like Vietnamese people hung out with Vietnamese people, right? Filipinos hung out with Filipinos. Like there wasn't unity. There wasn't like solidarity. I think because of Trump's like Chinese virus, and I do see us relating to each other as equals instead of like, I'm better than you. Because I do think part of Asian culture is like there's a lot of there are some differences. Like don't get me wrong, but
sure.
I think one of the things I'm realizing from the last year and just being a leader in this space and interviewing people who are also leaders in this diversity and being the only Asian executive leader in sales roles usually is that we have so much room to grow and we don't really have a voice. We don't have a platform. We don't own media channels. We don't like, we're not politicians typically. I think there's a lot of Indian like politicians and Indian executives, but there's not a lot of East Asian. I think the South Asians are doing a much better job at having a seat at the business table, and that's something I'm so passionate about. That I honestly spend every day thinking about it. So how can I advance us as a whole? Whether it's through my YouTube channel, my writing books, my interviews, my LinkedIn articles, like my blog, like there's some way that I try to advance us as a whole. And I used to lose sleep about it because I was just like, oh man, I'm not doing enough. But then I realized like I'm doing my part, and take it like one day at a time. But I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, it was just I was curious as to how it formed, and like you saw some sort of need and you saw some sort of not problem, but something that you wanted to change up a little bit. So I was just curious. So tell me about Asians in sales. What are your thoughts there?
Oh yeah. So it was funny because this is like a hilarious story that I told a bunch of people. But I remember like the first day at TriNet, I came in as an individual contributor, and luckily like at TriNet, like we all make good money, so you meet a lot of like very ambitious people. But one of the leaders, the EVP or the national VP of sales, his name is Paul Park. He's Korean. I went to him literally on my first day of work, and I was like, I want to get to know you. I call it Brandon Ngai. So I reached out to him and I was like, dude, you're amazing. Like you're such a great public speaker. Like I look up to you. Like. And then he took me under his wing, and he would like when he flew into New York City. He's from the Bay Area. He's someone who I try to model after him in a lot of ways. Always adding value. Like he's the most connected person I've ever met in my entire life. Like he knows every VC, every PE. Like super inspiring dude. But so anytime I meet like another Asian in sales, I always try to create a community around that. So, we would have happy hours when he was in town. Like he would take us out to get Korean barbecue and we would build a relationship. So he started an Asian ERG at TriNet. And then Garrett, the guy who started the LinkedIn Asian Alliance at LinkedIn, reached out to me and said, hey, we have an opening, would love to. And then that's how I got involved, because the guy who referred me to LinkedIn, Garrett, is also someone I really look up to. But the thing I like about Garrett is that he's able to connect with anyone, to not only just Asians. Or for me, I feel like I was only able to like connect with Asians, but from being around him, I realized that there was like a huge block in me connecting with like everyone, with, to be quite frank, like white people. And then so that was like one of the biggest breakthroughs recently, where I was like, oh, like I was shooting myself in the foot, like not wanting to connect with like non-minorities, you know. So then I started doing that, and then my life has changed a lot because I've been more open to not only hanging out with Asians and connecting with like waspy type of people, but they're all amazing people. And that then for me, like I'm making more of a conscious effort to become better friends with a lot of like white people, because I realized like, wow, like I was really shooting myself in the foot for that.
I remember that how that conversation came up first, and then when you told me that, I just looked at you. I was like, "Huh, interesting."
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Like it's stuff that like most people don't really talk about, but I mean,
yeah,
be honest with yourself.
Yeah, social structures. Okay, awesome. So let's jump to self-development. You have done probably more programs than I even know how to count. I probably can't even count that high. And the incredible part is that actually Christina had an awesome question about it, was through all of the self-development that you've done and all the things you're constantly focused on, what are you currently focused on, like working on within yourself, right? Like what are you focused on currently growing and developing at this stage in your life?
Yeah, I think like starting a family, right? I think that's why I've been laser focused on being the number one rep and being president's club. Like, yeah, hitting 400% of my Q1, like that's cool and all, but if I can't do it sustainably over time, then that doesn't matter. So the goal is just to like crush my numbers, be able to not only obviously pay off this mortgage in less than 30 years, right? Because of the, the interest rates and stuff like that. But buy a second home in Manhattan, right? And then buy eventually like a waterside property. So I think for me, it's being like the best father I can be and setting myself up by, learning and just becoming like a better human being. Because I think on the business side, like I think that's always like something that it's like almost like an addiction. Like I don't think that'll ever go away. So I think the family side I would say is number one. So that's why I've been focusing a lot more energy with my partner, and then family as well. Like building a stronger relationship with like Tina and Jenny, and I'm making more of an effort. And then also like the extended family too. Like I've been calling and catching up with a lot of my cousins and my uncles and my aunts, and hosting like a reunion and getting us together. So I think that's been really cool to see that come to fruition.
It's great. So on the personal side, and you're talking a lot about family, and one question that Edwin had was, what does being a good father mean to you? He just had a child, by the way, so like it's very top of mind, and we know your history and background of father figures. So I know it's a deep question, but
yeah, I think so shout out to the book that I'm releasing. I'm releasing a collaboration book called Redefining Masculinity in a couple months. So that book, stay tuned, will be on Amazon. But that talks exactly about what being a good father would be like. So
awesome.
For me, it's a lot of the topics that we've discussed around vulnerability, right? Modeling behavior and I don't think perfectionism is like ever the key, right? I think no one's ever perfect. But I think modeling behavior is like being vulnerable and communicating like when you're at fault. Like today I woke up and, I spoke to my partner. I said like, hey, like, sorry for being like not so nice to you yesterday. Like, that's not me. And, she got like emotional, but she's like, yeah, like, just listen to me. Like, don't try to solve my problems, So I think like admitting to your faults and taking responsibility, that's key, but not overdoing it where like you're paralyzed by the fear of failure and you leave your kids like my father, but I have compassion that, him leaving is probably like the best thing that's ever happened to us because it was such a toxic environment. Two, And I think that's what why the book is so interesting, because I have authors and and people from so many different backgrounds, like biracial people from every walk of life that I'm connected to. Um, I think being like stability, being like security, like, my in-laws, they do a great job. Like, her father does a great job of providing financial stability and modeling comfort, and like being able to pay for their kids like college and things like that, like things I would never think about. I'm like, oh wow, I'm starting to see why it's important, because your legacy is so important. Like, when you ask my partner, who she idolizes, who's her like biggest role model, she says her parents. That's really touching for someone who, when asked that question, I'm like Tony Robbins and like
Yeah.
Ben and stuff like that, Kobe Bryant. It's interesting, but I think it doesn't have to look a certain way. But I do think the commonalities is like vulnerability, a sense of security and comfort and stability, like a physical presence, and even the presence in the sense of like listening and just being there for your kids.
Awesome. I think everyone's gonna love that.
Yeah, I mean, he's I'm sure he'll be a great father. Like, he's probably like the one guy that I think like he's probably like will be the best father like ever, in my opinion. Yeah.
Excited to see the journey, especially through the fellows.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. So let's wrap up with, I think, a topic that has universally been talked about whenever like I ask people about Davidson, especially with all of your handwritten notes, is gratitude, right? So like how does gratitude play into your day-to-day life? Like, are there certain practices that you have? How does it change your worldly perspective?
Yeah, I think so. I do journal. The thing I forgot to mention in the daily practices, like I do journal like at night every day. So gratitude for the day, like grateful for Brandon's like incredibly thoughtful questions and the amount of preparation. To grateful for my sisters for being able to share that part of me that not many people know about. So every morning when I wake up, I'll just do one full page of gratitude. And
Wow.
so I do like as far as like I'll write like 1,000 things I'm grateful for. Like if I'm like really in like a bad place, I'll do like 100 just because it gets me back into like a good mindset. So I think gratitude's the most powerful thing for anyone, whether they choose to acknowledge it or not. And all of my heroes and all of the people that I look up to and that I want to be like all share that in common, where on their podcast, like they'll acknowledge their guests, and then when you hear like people like Kobe Bryant and amazing people get interviewed and feel that acknowledgement, you're like, that's powerful, because this person's net worth is billions, and the fact that they're able to like be moved by that acknowledgement is incredibly touching for me.
That's great. And this is a question that you oftentimes ask in the fellows group. So, just curious to what the answer is today, but what are you most grateful for today?
Yeah, I am grateful for like a partnership, us playing video games a lot. Like, I'm grateful for all the wedding gifts that we received. Like we received like Apple TV from Davis, and my cousin bought us the TV, and just like gratitude for like the family. Like that's touching, because I used to like not really quote, my story was like, oh, I don't care about physical like possessions and stuff, but it is really an act of love, and I'm grateful for that. I was able to change that and to not view it as like, because my story was like, oh, like material things, like that's this consumerist society, very negative. But now I view it as like, okay, well, no, like I see the beauty in it, because, like my cousin phrased it. He's like, yeah, you watch your TV every day, so you'll think of me.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so grateful for that. That definitely made me laugh, and to be able to smile.
Beautiful. All right. So I guess the last question really is just, what's next? You have so many things going on, right? Like what's next for Davidson Hang?
So the second book, so the Great Pause, the companion journal book is releasing soon. So we just finished that. So I'm excited to share that and promote that because I think it's a book about the silver linings of COVID. So I think that book will change a lot of lives, and it's already crushing it on Amazon. So I'm excited for my contributions there. Just finished a rough draft, and the final draft is due soon. So I'm excited to share that with the world. And Redefining Masculinity is releasing early 21. So the rough draft, I mean, the rough draft is due this month. So I'm excited for all those contributions. Yeah, and I'm excited to episode 100. I'm going to be interviewing my manager who won Manager of the Year. So I'm excited to distill that knowledge and that like the framework and just her being with the world. I think that would be incredibly impactful.
That's awesome. All right, man. Well, it's pretty much been an hour. I've gone through most of my questions. I still have like a few stragglers in here, but I think it's a good place to end off.
Cool, man. I appreciate you, Brandon, and I want to acknowledge you for just like your not only like your attention to detail and your thoughtfulness when it comes to like building relationships and not only building them but maintaining and cultivating the relationships. I think it's easy to like start an initial connection, but then you also follow through with the follow-ups and the consistency over time. So yeah, I really appreciate you and the communities that you're a part of and all your contributions. And yeah, man, I'm excited to see what lies next for you too.
Likewise, man, I appreciate that. And after the recording, I'll show you the present that essentially we put together because it actually showed gratitude to you as well.
Cool. Thanks, brother. Peace.
All right, cool, man. Well, thanks for the opportunity.
Well, that's it, folks. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe and let me know what your thoughts are. If there were any takeaways, I welcome all positive and constructive feedback and hope you enjoy. Stay tuned for more interesting stories and guests. Take care.